Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining another DevTest Community Webcast. Today on the phone we have Dan Mazet. He's a member of the DevTest product team. We're going to be covering SV model healing today, and I think Dan has a demo for you that he's going to go through. If you have any questions as we're going through today's session, you can feel free to enter those questions into the Q&A box. You can find that in the right-hand panel of the WebEx screen. If you don't see it maximized in your WebEx, you can click the blue box with the question mark in it at the top right. That'll open up the Q&A box, and you can type your questions in there. We'll get to them at the end of the session today. Other than that, we'll also be opening up the line for verbal questions at the end as well. So if you have a question that you'd rather ask over the phone, you can do it at the end as well. All right, I'm now going to turn the call over to Dan. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Mel. Good morning, everyone. Taking a slightly different approach today. Usually I do a PowerPoint slide and then a demo. Today I'm just going to do the demo. Tell me if you like it. I think there's a survey at the end. Same, better, or worse. Not sure if anyone was really getting any value out of the PowerPoint, so we'll see. But let's jump in. I'm Dan Mazet. I'm with the Continuous Delivery, the SWAT team. And our goal is to make sure that customers get the greatest value from our solutions. So we have a few WebExes, every month, different topics. And one of the features that I think is kind of underutilized or maybe misunderstood is this, the execution modes, the model healing, the learning mode, really, how to update an image. Customers also, they'll ask things like, how do I, update an image? Do I have to re-record the image? That's kind of a lot of work. Do I manually add it? Do I merge them? What do I do? So it's actually pretty simple, as we'll see. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I'll walk you through the process. And I'll start from scratch, right? I'll pause at the end for questions. Just give me maybe 10, 15 minutes to go through this, and I'll even cover a little bit, what is DevTest and SV too. But I'll assume most people are familiar with it, right? So when I say DevTest, I'm talking about service virtualization, app test, Lisa. It's all the same thing, right? It's all the same application. When you install DevTest, you actually get app test and SV and CAI and all of these things together. So today we're really going to be talking about service virtualization. I'm going to leave app test for another time, okay? Virtual service, I can cover that too. What is a virtual service? So we let you virtualize software and behavior of software or an application, right, for development or testing purposes. Maybe the application doesn't exist yet. It's currently in development. Well, we don't have to wait for it to be done to test it. We can actually create a temporary service that we can use to write test cases against. Also, maybe you're paying for each transaction that you run against a service. Maybe it's a credit check and you pay $1 each time you write a credit report lookup, right? You don't want to run your tests and pay $1 for each one of those lookups. So we can run it against a virtual service, right? That's the general idea. Virtual service. So let me show you. I'll open up Workstation. I'll show you Portal 2. I think everyone's familiar with this. I'm on version 10.2. This is the latest GA version. And I'll just open up any of these to kind of show you. So a virtual service, right? We're kind of familiar with what it does and how it works. But there's actually two components to a virtual service. There's the VSM, the virtual service model, and the VSI, the virtual service image. Okay, it's important to know what they are and how they're used. The VSM is actually the workflow. It's the steps to execute the matches and match the request to the response. It looks a little complicated. It's really not, right? And this is automatically generated. So the VSM receives the requests and responds to them in the absence of the actual application. And you can think of it as a series of steps, right? The workflow to be executed, right, when a request is received. So it comes in here. We should do these checks, if this, and then it follows the path, right? So pretty easy to understand. The steps create this kind of, get executed, and they pass back a response to the request. And we automatically generate these steps in the VSM. So you don't have to do this yourself, right? This is done for you. You can modify them, right? If I can say abort the test instead of fail the test, for example, or vice versa, right? I can modify it, but you really don't have to create this on your own. So let's look at the VSI. This is really where we're going to be playing. The VSI, the virtual service image. The virtual service image. So this kind of, I guess it contains the request and response data, and it's a record, right, of all the transactions, the interactions between the client and the server, right? It references the VSM, right? Each request is processed through the VSM, but it's actually a separate entity. It's really a separate file. Everything's file-based. And the VSI is used to deliver the response. That's the key. Based on this request, what response do I get? Right. So this request is tied to a certain response. That's the idea. So in order to really show you, I need to create a new image. So let's make a new project. We'll call it Kiosk 10. Okay, so we've got a blank project. I'll come back here. Let me actually show you how to do it in Portal. I like how that works a little cleaner. So we'll open up Portal, right, our web interface. We'll log in and we'll create a simple service. Again, you should be familiar with this. If not, I think we have some others about this, or I'm happy to go over this offline. But the way Portal's laid out, there's kind of this create, manage, monitor workflow. First, you create a virtual service or test case. Then you kind of manage it, you edit it, you list it, and then you monitor it once it's deployed. So we'll do create virtual service. And we have different ways to create virtual services based on what's available to you, right? Again, depending on where you are in the development cycle, if the application's available or it's still being developed, you'll have different ways to create the service. So if you have the application, do a recording, right? That's it. That's the key to everything. That's the golden rule, right? Do a recording if you have an application. A lot easier to record it than it is to get RR pairs from engineering or WSDL or Swagger spec. It's a lot easier to edit later, right? Just makes things so much easier. So if you have the application, great. If you don't, no problem. You know, there's different ways ways we can create it through RR pairs or WSDLs, right? So through recording, we have two demo applications that are available to you, right? We've got the, let's start demo server. Demo server is actually a bank. It's kind of a kiosk or an ATM. That's kind of cool. It mimics, you know, an ATM interface. So you can insert your card, you can make a deposit, make withdrawal, that kind of thing. Then we have the cars application, cars demo, which forward cars, which is a web-based interface that mimics a car buying, a car retail, you know, search for a car, do a VIN lookup, you can apply for a loan, that sort of thing. So maybe that's if you're doing web-based applications. But this one will work fine. It's a little bit quicker. So it started. I'll open up the kiosk so you can see that. There's a web interface for this as well. This is my kiosk. Okay, so this is my ATM. This is my application, right? So think of this as your application. You're going to have a different application. For me, I'm interested in creating a virtual service to mimic my ATM system so I can run tests against it. It's hard to get an ATM and get it stocked with cash. I wouldn't be able to get the key, right? By default, we're running on port 8080, and it's on my local machine. Your application would probably have a different IP address, different port. This is important because we're going to have to change this later. So just know for now, default is 8080. We're running on localhost. Okay. I do have a user created too. We can just make sure we can log in. Okay. So we're good there. So I have my application up, I have a blank project created. Let's go ahead and record a virtual service, right? We have different ways of doing that. This is going to be a recording. So let's give it a name. I like to kind of standardize names. I start with a VS underscore. We can call this bank ATM1. Right? You can say, what is this service going to do? We are going to log in, check balance, and log out. That's what all the service is going to do, okay? We'll click next. Everyone should be familiar with this. You can also do this in Workstation, similar process. The idea is that, so we're the client here, right? This Kiosk is our client. We're going to go through the VS recorder, which is DevTest, right? Record all those transactions that pass them through to the server and record the response, right? So we're kind of the intermediary. Pick a port, any unused port. E10, I think, is unused. And my application is running locally as well. Makes it a little bit easier. We saw this before. Localhost 8080, right? Whatever your application, wherever that's running, you input here, okay? This is just really a random port, random unused port, okay? So once I do start recording, any interactions, don't forget we have to change this. Change my application to go to DevTest, right? Any interactions through the kiosk will actually go to DevTest and be recorded and then pass through to the server, to the application. So we're recording. Let's select a user. Let's log in. What do we say we're going to do? Check the balance. So we'll go to checking, check the balance. Okay, so I have $1,010. Great. Let's log out. And as we're doing that, transactions, there we go, should be recorded here. Right, you can see if it's working. All good signs. We have login and okay. Data protocol handlers and the data protocol. So I know we're using REST, so we can add that here. On the left, you have your available data protocols. On the right, you have requested, and kind of draw a line down the screen. This is the request. This is for the response, right? So everything's kind of separated like that. You can see that in Workstation too. Close that project. I'll just show you there too, where it's kind of divided. Suffice to say, you can usually click next here. We do a pretty good job at identifying the protocols. This is giving me an option to change how I handle everything. I can view the transactions. We're getting a token, looking at an account number. This is log out, right? Lots of things I can do here. The idea behind this portal view, which is a little bit different than the Workstation way of creating a virtual service, is the simplicity, right? I really don't have to dive into here to do much. So we'll save that and we'll deploy it. Okay, that was a basic recording. So we gathered our transactions, right, as RR pairs, as live traffic recording, an engineering spec, right, whatever it may be. We use them to create a virtual service using a certain, workflow that we saw, right? And we deployed the virtual service to our VSE, to our virtual service environment, right? So it's pretty quick, pretty easy, pretty familiar. How do you modify it? This is the key, right? So you do that, you create your virtual service, and then you have it running, and over time it's going to get outdated. It's going to need to be updated. You're going to expand it. Maybe you don't use it anymore. Maybe the project goes away and it kind of just sits there in your archives. Maybe you can use it later for something. But if you're going to maintain it, you're going to need to update it. Going to add new transactions to it, change the responses, things like that. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can, of course, do it manually. But we kind of give you a way to do it automatically, which is really nice. And to do that, we have to use the execution mode. Okay, so we created it. We can manage. Let's just show here. What did we call this? Kiosk. We'll change the project to the Kiosk one. It's a little filter here, which is nice. This refresh button always comes in handy. And you can monitor that it's deployed. There you go. So we have our virtual service, the bank ATM, port 8010. It's up and running. And this is important to the transaction count column. Of course, the number of transactions, right? This is what we want to look at, though, this execution mode column. Well, let me give you kind of an overview of what this is, right? The execution mode lets you set the the mode of the virtual service, right? There's different modes available depending on the service. For example, if you don't have a live invocation step, you won't have live invocation or even the learning mode, right? So you have to have that step in your model. Let me just open, so what did we call it? Kiosk. Let's open that one. So you won't have that one. By default, we're going to do most efficient. This is always the default option, the most efficient. Transaction tracking is kind of nice. You want to do something like CAI or see the transactions. Live invocation will go to the live system. That's great for if you want to run the same test maybe against the virtual service and then run it against the live system. So maybe you're ready to GA, right? It's pretty easy to switch over this way. Learning mode is what I want to focus on. And there's actually two different learning modes to make things nice and easy, right? There's learning mode and there's image validation mode, okay? Image validation, it's also called like a live healing or healing mode, right? It's used for new and existing transactions. And the key is that you apply the changes later. So it does new and existing, but you apply the changes later. Okay, so we'll record the trends. You have your existing service, right? That's your base, that's your foundation. Then we have these changes, and these changes we're going to record. Right? We're going to track these changes, but we're not going to deploy them to the service yet. We're going to save them. We're going to catalog them, archive them, and give you the option to kind of download them and redeploy them later. Obviously, the other way is to deploy them immediately, right? So that's your actual true learning mode. So the image validation mode is helpful when you have a live system that's changed and the virtual service hasn't been updated, or maybe to check the live system and the virtual service are in sync, right? Maybe another team gives you the VS or the live system, right? And you want to make sure that yours matches theirs. True learning mode, it's like image validation, but it automatically heals. It automatically updates the image with the new or updated response from the system, from the live system. Right, the next request that's passed to it is automatically going to see the new learned response. Okay, so the image is checked, then the live system is checked, and the live system always comes out on top. Okay, so again, learning mode is for new transactions, learning them and applying them immediately. And image validation is for applying them later. And it also works with existing. That's the key difference. That's a key takeaway. Okay. Just to kind of note, if you're running in learning mode, you won't learn a new transaction if there's a meta response. A meta response is still a valid response. Okay, so we won't learn that. It's really for new transactions. Right, so this is for really adding new transactions to your service. This is maybe for image validation is maybe for updating your image, right? This is for expanding, and this is for updating. Okay, so understand those concepts clearly, right? Okay, so let's do, we can just do learning. Actually, let's do this one first, and let me show you. So we're on 8010. We're on 8010 here. We're talking to the virtual service now, right? So we're going to use our application, call it a manual test case. I'm going to make a request to the virtual service, and we're going to see what it comes back with, right? So let's do what we did before. We'll check the balance, same balance that we had before, right? 1010. Now if I do a deposit, let's deposit $20. Something happened here. So it actually gave me the meta response. It gave me the meta response because I don't have anything for deposit. It doesn't know deposit. Same thing with withdrawal. Withdraw $100. Same thing. We don't have any withdrawal. The only thing I can do with this image that it knows is balance. That's the only operation it understands. Right? So it doesn't have these other requests and responses it defined. Doesn't know what to do, so it's giving me the meta response, right? That's a problem because I want to test the whole image, right? The whole application, right? So I have to expand my image. Back to execution mode. Now you're saying, okay, what way, how do I do that, right? What's the best way to do that? So again, you have two options. Do you want to learn new operations, which yes, we do. So we'll do learning mode. Or we can update new or existing and apply them later. Learning mode is good for our purposes, so let's do that. Don't have to stop it. I don't have to bring it down. It's still running, right? Just changing the execution mode, and important, please remember, click Save. Can't tell you how many times I've done that. It makes it red so you remember, but now it's changed, right? Now we're running in learning mode. We're on port 8010, still up. What I'll have to do here, just double check. Reload my application. So before we saw that I couldn't do anything but my balance, right? So checking balance. So we know this. We didn't know deposit. Now deposit works. It doesn't work from the image. It's actually pulling it from the server, which updated the image. Right? Same thing with withdrawal. Let's do transfer. All of these, it's learning from the server. It's pulling them from the server, right? And it's actually updating the image. How do we know? Well, the transaction count is going up. And we can actually see, take a look at inspection view. I don't want to get too deep into these, but there's different ways to kind of look at the transactions that are going on. So you have this inspection view, which is going to show you the transactions within the image. And we can see it's got this transfer operation, right? And it's going to show you the model steps that it's running. This is the listener step. This is the router step. This is the response. These are all the same ones that we saw in the virtual service model, right? So it's learning what to do. It's going to the live server to get it, right? And then it's responding. Very cool. So you can do that for the transfer, withdraw. These are all the ones we're learning. Okay, and it's actually updating the image. To get the image, let's say you want to download it, whatever it may be. We have this MAR file, model archive. it's really a zip file, right? Everything in DevTest is file-based. So it's really easy to share projects or virtual services test cases among teams, or to save them, offline to a NAS share, whatever it may be. So I can actually show you download the zip file. Let's call it what is this? VS Bank ATM 1. So I can show you we have these transactions now. Just change this to a zip, and I can open it. And this is the same layout now as our project. So if you go to your DevTest directory, Lisa Home DevTest install directory, you look at your projects, you'll see they have the same structure. This one's called Bank Demo 1. Just overwrite the existing one, or go into it and just copy it over. It's easier this way. And you'll see your virtual service. Let's go ahead and open it. And you can actually see the transactions that are added, right? Your deposit, your withdrawal, your transfer. So that's pretty much it. The key is the differences, the definitions, right? Knowing when to use what. So if you want to update the entire image, if you want to record your transactions and existing, use image validation and download the MAR and redeploy it. If you're really looking for just new transactions and you want actually a lot faster, maybe you're short time, maybe just have a window you want the engineers to make a few calls, whatever it may be, you can use the learning mode, okay? There is also a way to kind of do a compare. Let's go to, this is a little slow, machine's doing too much, but there's a way to do a compare between the two. And we can do something called model healing. So let's change this. We can do like image validation. And we can run some transactions. This is a different view. I can show you that view again. Just explain the difference real quick. So you have start and stop. You have download the MAR, right? Reset the transaction count to 0, or you can delete the thing, right? There's two views for the transactions. There's session and tracking information, and there's inspection view. Session and tracking information is session, right? It's for this session. What transactions, what request response are going in, actively for these transaction counts. Inspection is the entire image. That's going to show you the whole image. So the inspector showed us this whole image here. And the session is just going to show you the current transactions. So let's do some transactions. Helps if you type it in right. Okay. So you'll see when transactions come in, there's an icon actually here that has some meanings behind it. Don't want to get too much into it, but basically you have your session, and then you have your transactions here. And the idea here in model healing is that you can update the image with the live session, the stateless transactions, and actually remove the differences, the disparity, something's incomplete or incorrect, and kind of get the virtual service to work correctly, right? So you can remove the disparity between the live system and the virtual service and have the virtual service work the way you want it to work, right? So this is another way of kind of updating it, a very manual way of updating it. So you select the transactions to update by clicking the checkbox, right? And once you do that, same thing as before, you can download the updated VSI based on your selection, right? This is a much more manual process than just going here and running learning mode, right? It's another way. It's a good way if you're having issues. But really from the execution modes, if you're not using most efficient, if you're not going straight to the virtual service, you're probably going to go to the live system. And if you're not doing either of those, you're probably updating it in learning mode, right? That's pretty much it. Don't forget to change it back, right, when you're done. If you leave it running in learning mode, it will accumulate many, 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 many transactions, and you'll kind of have them all queued up in this database, and they'll never really get applied. So you want to make sure to kind of apply them. You don't want to really run in learning mode. It's really just for updating the image. And of course, you can download and save once you change it, right, and open it back up and redeploy it. So that's pretty much it. Took a little more time than I wanted to, but let's open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Dan. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A box in the right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. Also, I did put a link in the chat just promoting some of the learning paths we have for DevTest. So if you want to learn more about this and some other stuff around the DevTest product, you can click that link and see what we have to offer as far as education on the product. So also at this time, we can open it up for verbal questions. If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, you can click #6 and unmute yourself and ask your question now. Okay, we have one question, and what are the scenarios for using image validation?
Sure. So let me kind of explain it again. So, and this is very, important, right? This is the key to it. There's the two different learning modes, right? There's image validation, live healing mode, or model healing mode for new and existing. That's the key, existing transactions. You apply the differences later. So we queue up all the differences, you download them as a MAR, and then you redeploy the service. I mean, it's not very difficult, it doesn't really take much time, but you're actually redeploying the new service with the changes. It's helpful when you have a system that's changed. Your live system changed and the virtual service is not updated, right? And you truly want to update the virtual service to match the live service. With image validation mode, you're going to get the most accurate, the most up-to-date, in sync image, right? And let's say you don't know what the changes are, right? You're not really in control of the application, so you could have certain request that has a response, and that's documented already. That's in your image. but the responses change, right? And you want to learn that new response. You use image validation. If you use the learning mode, if you use the other one, you're not going to get that because you already have a response recorded. So it's really not new in our eyes, right? Same thing for the meta. You know, when you run a VSI in learning mode, we don't learn a new transaction if the response is available. You know, even if it's meta, because the change of attribute value for like an exact match would return the meta, and we won't learn it. So it's really when you're playing around with the match tolerance and the execution modes, you might miss a few things. So use image validation unless you're really, if it's someone else's application and you really want to learn all the new responses. You can use the quick and dirty learning mode to apply the changes immediately if it's your image and you know what changed. Let's say you're adding to it incrementally, I guess is a good use case, right? You're starting to build an image library. You're starting, you know, with a few transactions. You don't want to spend an hour recording an image and then have to scrap it, right? So you can kind of build it incrementally. That's a nice way of doing it. Does that help a little bit?
Ramu, if you have any other questions around that, just let us know in the Q&A. Okay, we have another question. Does learning mode still access the live system even if a transaction is found? For example, if the responses are different or a new specific transaction is there and it can be learned automatically?
Right, so no. So image validation will, learning mode, if there's a response, even if it's meta, we won't learn the new response. Let's just see if I got that right.
Okay, we have a follow-up question on.
But yes, it does access the live. If the transaction is found, no, it does not access the live system.
All right, and we do have a follow-up question from that first question that you answered on image validation. What happens if the actual service is unavailable during learning/image validation?
So you have to have that. You have to have the service. You don't have the service, you won't get the response, and we'll go to the image. So this has to go. This goes back to your basic kind of workflow, your model. And when you're looking at your virtual service model, there's different steps. There's a live invocation step, right? That'll go to the live service. Obviously, if you don't have the service, the system, the live system, we can only go to the virtual service. So hopefully the virtual service has a response. If it doesn't, you'll get kind of the meta of metas, which will, you know, usually, you know, this request cannot be found is the default. But you'll get your meta response if it doesn't exist. Otherwise, you'll get the image response. That's your basic virtual service workflow, right? Depending on what execution mode and what steps you have in the model, usually we first go to the image to see if a match exists. If so, we check the match tolerance, right? If a match doesn't exist, then we go to the service to try to learn it and record it. If it's image validation mode and it's a new response, even though we have an existing response, we will update the image. Otherwise, if it's just, you know, traditional learning mode, apply changes immediately, we won't because it already exists in the image. So those are kind of the workflows. A workflow diagram, actually, for those two might help now that I'm thinking about it. So maybe I should put a PowerPoint together to kind of explain those two differently. Maybe I'll add that to the community's notes to kind of explain that a little bit more, because that is the key, right? Is understanding the different definitions, you know, the different behaviors of these modes. But a lot does depend on the model, your particular service. At the end of the day, it's what do you want to happen, right? Do you want the service to be updated no matter what, or do you only want certain changes to be updated? You get to decide, right? Do you want even existing responses to be changed, or do you want only new responses to be learned?
Awesome, thanks. And Dan, if you do create those that presentation, just send it over to me and I'll add it to the webcast recap that I post.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay, we have another question. And will the error be learned if the actual service is unavailable?
Will the error be learned? So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? If you know the application is stable, you're going to overwrite a known response, right? That might be a valid response. Will the error be learned? If the actual service, if the live system is unavailable, we just reply with the virtual service. If we don't have it, we respond with the meta. So we don't actually give, I'm not sure what you mean by the error, if you mean the meta or giving an error the live service unavailable. If you want to try to explain that maybe.
And while we wait for a response on that, we have another question in. In learning mode, when a new operation transaction is added, does it create a meta response?
No, you just have your, you just add the new transaction. The meta, so there's like the meta and then the meta, right? There's the meta for each kind of easier to show you. Where's my screen? You have your transaction meta, and then you have your service image meta, right? And you can change the meta for conversational and stateless. Those can be different. And then your individual transaction metas, right, can be different. So you'll have a meta response, and you'll have a true response, but we're not going to change your service image meta response. So learning mode, when a new operation transaction is added, does it create a meta? So yeah, so it will create a meta for that transaction. And I'm looking for a diagram to see if we have something to explain, but I don't think we have anything. So it'd be good to create one of those and maybe post that to the doc too, to explain the difference between these two, because these can easily get lost. In fact, all the execution modes, right, can be probably explained a bit better. And don't forget, you may not have all the options. If there's no live invocation step, right, if you don't have a live service and you created a virtual service with no live endpoint, with no live invocation step, then you're just going to get responses from the virtual service. You're not going to have the option to even change it.
Hey, Dan,
yep.
Are you sharing your screen? Are you trying to share your screen right now? Because we don't see it.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, so here for this one, if I go, this one I created from a WSDL. This one only has a virtual service. I can't even do learning mode in this because there's no live system. There's actually no live execution step. The model, the virtual service model for this one is different. So just be aware too that you need a recording. You need access to a live system to really do learning mode, right? That's kind of, maybe it's assumed, but don't forget about it, right? You need to be able to learn new transactions from the live application. Okay. Any other questions? I'll go through them. Try to just some a little bit more detail, maybe give you some links. in the Q&A and response and give you that diagram to kind of show you more of a visual workflow. I love pictures, like how that works too. But I know a lot of people like to see the actual product and see it from start to finish rather than just kind of jumping in and giving you the here's the final one. And don't forget, if you have your own MARs or your own use cases or anything like that, you can put them in the, you can share them, right? You can put the use cases and we can try to reproduce those or something similar for you. So it can be more of a real, we always use the cars in the bank, right? So if you have another example that you want to use, let us know.
Okay, any other questions, guys? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I did just put up a poll. If you could let us know what you thought of the session today, especially because, as Dan said at the beginning of the session, this is a little different without any slides. Let us know what you thought of this format and whether we should keep doing it like this moving forward, or whether you like the more traditional presentation way of handling the webcast. Also, just overall on the topic, let us know your thoughts as well. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Dan, for another great presentation, as always. I'll be posting the recording, the Q&A transcript, and any other content related to this session to the community later today in a webcast recap. You should also receive a follow-up email to the email that you registered for the session with a link to that. So keep an eye out for that. We do have more webcasts coming up. We have a session on 10.3 coming in mid-April, and we have roadmap sessions that are constantly being put out for enterprise customers. So if you're interested in either of those, you can go to the DevTest community and RSVP to those at any time. All right, well, thank everyone for joining. I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you out in the communities. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.